So first of all, just to reiterate kind of Mark's welcome, it's great to see so many online for what is quite a novel initiative in this particular field. So we're delighted to get started with it after, as Mark said, a lot of background work, and just again to thank, I suppose, Annette for all her work in organising today's event, and also to Nala for the support that they have given us along with the Irish Research Council to get this initiative off the ground. Again, I am noticing some names, some familiar names. So some people may have seen some of this content before, because I have been tasked with the introduction to numeracy. So what is numeracy and how can we incorporate or develop numeracy skills of adult learners? Again, I'm going to present a model that many of you might have seen before, but I do present some new ideas, around that model. Mark, I will rely on you as well just to keep me on time. So I know I have 20 minutes, so I'll be finished by half, I'm hoping.
Perfect.
So I suppose just to give us something to think about as we progress through today's seminar, what is numeracy? And I think that's such a broad question that very few people have managed to answer it comprehensively. So rather than thinking of it in such a broad light, I've tried to break it down into 3 sub-questions. So these are, what is it that a numerous person can do? What is it that a numerate person knows? And what are the characteristics of a numerate person? So a numerate person is what? So if you could keep them in your mind, we will have time for some takeaway messages and some final kind of discussion conclusion points after the evaluation. So maybe we'll come back to those at that point. So I think the first thing, I think this is something very important to get across to adult learners, particularly those that are maybe reticent or retreating from the field of numeracy. But numeracy really does matter for people's life's chances. And there's been a great amount of longitudinal research done into this. So that's long scale studies over a long period of time. So we know that there is a connection between poor numeracy and a number of other life indicators. And one of those being a connection between poor numeracy and poor levels of health. Poor numeracy is also related, or there's a correlation between numeracy skills and unemployment levels. Likewise, there's a correlation between numeracy skills and prison rates. And it also has an impact on people's levels of social confidence, as well as impacting on the likelihood that a person is employed or not employed. Numeracy actually also tends to be an indicator of the wages that a person can attract if they are lucky enough to have a job. So that really just, I wanted to point out from the very start why numeracy matters. So why is this important for us as adult practitioners and for adult learners to understand what numeracy is and why they need to study it? So here are some just lay views about numeracy. So it's numbers. Again, when we put this question, it could be to pre-service teachers, which we've done a number of studies on. It can be to the public. What does numeracy mean to you? And we're currently involved in another project that's trying to get adult learners' insights into this question. What is numeracy? Often people limit their thinking about numeracy to number and computation. And what they often visualize numeracy is the kind of calculations that you do in your head. And for that reason, they put it down to common sense. So even though these people might be using numeracy on a daily basis in their professions, they'll say, oh, that's just cop on, that's just common sense. And John Keogh has done some fantastic work in that regard if anyone did want to follow up on it. If people are viewing numeracy in terms of a real world skill, it tends to be under the umbrella of the very basic mathematics skills needed to function in real life. And what often we hear is being able to handle money. So in this context, numeracy can often be seen as what we term as survival maths. Now, when numeracy is associated with mathematics, it has connotations of the basics. Okay, so again, it's like the numeracy, or the mathematics learned at primary school. So a lot of people see numeracy as not going beyond the content covered at primary school, whereas in reality, numeracy is so much more than that. And this was actually a study in Australia conducted by Professor Merlin Goose, where some students suggested that numeracy was a term for veggie mathematics. And that's the term in Australia for resource mathematics. So someone that's struggling with mainstream mathematics, they then go into numeracy classes. So that was the definitions provided by a wide range of people in the public in relation to numeracy. And you can see there's a huge overlap between people's perception of numeracy and their understanding of mathematics. but they are quite different. And I think that's a key point that we need to get across, that numeracy and mathematics, while many of the same basic concepts are there, there is a strong or a significant difference. So this was a nice quote from Steen that really helps to articulate what that difference is. So mathematics is about abstraction. It's looking at patterns in what appear to be different things. And abstraction is what is the powerful tool underpinning mathematics. But abstraction is not the focus of numeracy. Numeracy clings to specifics. It clings to contexts. And it's in these contexts that we reach conclusions. So numeracy is all about context. Mathematics then is more so in relation to abstraction. And I think making that differentiation, because it often is the abstraction that deters students from engaging in any form of number systems or numeracy or mathematics. And I use those three terms as different entities. It is the abstraction that often deters students across all three. So if they can see that numeracy differs and that it is not as abstract, it may help those reticent or retreating students overcome their fears. So looking then at, and again today we're looking at an introduction to numeracy, and to answer the question, what is numeracy? This was the very first definition, the mirror image of literacy, but involving quantitative thinking. So based on even the years here, numeracy is a fairly recent concept. So the first time it appeared was in this report in 1959, which was a report conducted on the education system in the UK. Now, right away, we can see that it was linked to literacy, and this was unfortunate. And I'll just highlight some of the reasons now. So just, sorry. The initial link that was established between literacy and numeracy has seen the two often being tied together. And what's often happened is numeracy has ended up being the poor relation in this relationship. So literacy and numeracy is the poor relation. But despite that, research suggests that it should actually be the opposite way around. Poor numeracy, more so than poor levels of literacy, limited transitions from school to work. This was found in a number of longitudinal studies conducted in the UK. Poor numeracy was also associated with low self-esteem, poor health prospects, lack of interest in social and political participation. Now, some similar findings were found in relation to literacy, but they were more exacerbated when people demonstrated poor numeracy skills. And in particular, females experienced a much greater negative impact from having low levels of numeracy than men, regardless of their level of literacy. So again, just by starting off by comparing numeracy and literacy in the way that Crowther did in his report actually has some repercussions going forward, and it may help to explain some people's issues in relation to numeracy and their hesitancy to develop their numeracy skills as opposed to their willingness, for want of a better word, to develop their literacy skills. One thing, and again, I know Mark and Kathy are probably sick of me saying this, but it's a real pet hate of mine. You will often hear people saying quite proudly, I was never any good at maths. I could never do numbers. But yet it is not socially acceptable to say, well, I can't read. And I think that's something that we as adult practitioners, as educators, have to help our learners to overcome. That it is not okay to be so kind of blasé and say, oh, sure, it's fine. I was never any good at numbers. My kids will never be any good at numbers. And that is the attitude that's out there. And you can see it from television ads, listening to radio conversations. It is perfectly acceptable to boast, for want of a better word, of not being good at numeracy. So then and I want to keep the theory to a minimum, so I will finish up on the theory side of it soon. The evolution of the conceptualization of numeracy. So where have we come from and where are we going to? That's essentially what I'm looking to answer here. So again, we started off with the Crowther report. Numeracy was a basic arithmetic skill. It was a mirror image of literacy. This then moved on and context came into it. So we were broadening our understanding of numeracy, and we now began to see that numeracy requires context and context of everyday life. This was developed further at the start of the 21st century. But again, there was this strong link between numeracy and mathematics. So numeracy, you see, was mathematics integrated with context. So what we had at the start of the 21st century, that should say 21st century, to be numerous is to use mathematics effectively to meet the general demands of life at home, in paid work, and for participation in community and civic life. This, however, has since shifted again, and now we see numeracy as a social practice. So what do we mean by that? It cannot be understood without fully taking into account social, cultural, and political context. So we're really driving home this numeracy without context doesn't make sense. So it shifts to context rather again than the abstraction. And for that reason, and this is where the numeracy meets, or this is how we frame the numeracy meets. Numeracy as a social practice places a spotlight on numeracy in the workplace, numeracy at home, numeracy when you're dealing with health issues, numeracy in school, numeracy in your everyday social, personal, and leisure lifestyles. That is what we mean by numeracy as a social practice. And again, by viewing it in this way, and this is possibly why there has been such a significant shift towards this, helps us again to distinguish between mathematics and numeracy. Okay, I'm not going to spend too long. Again, all of these slides will be available. I'm just conscious I'm nearly halfway through, and I just want to present the Common European Numeracy Framework. So myself and Cathy O'Sullivan, who's part of the research team, were involved in developing this framework. And as I said, I have presented this as a multiplier event, and many of you might have attended. So for the next 2 or 3 minutes, you may have seen these slides before. So what we have developed is a framework that looks at a number of different dimensions of numeracy. So we say numeracy involves context. It involves higher order skills. We want to move away. It's not just basic mathematics. There's so many more higher order skills involved with being numerate. It involves, of course, content, knowledge, and skills. We can't completely separate numeracy and mathematics because mathematics does play a role in developing students or adults' numeracy skills. So we have to acknowledge and recognize that, but they are not synonymous. Numeracy also involves dispositions, so it involves the affective as well as the cognitive. We then look at different categories of numeracy. So in daily life situations, in societal and regular work situations, and in specialized societal and work situations. So again, we are aware that different people will need numeracy for different things. Some people might just need it to survive day to day. Some people might need it in their workplace. Others might need specialized numeracy skills, and we need to look at how we can develop the necessary numeracy skills depending on the population in front of us. So just to give you an idea of the CENF model in action, and again, I've spoken about this at length during our multiplier event. If we were to look at fractions, decimals, and percentages, the content, knowledge, and skills required there would be quantity and number, using a calculator, and using apps and spreadsheets. Now, what I want to point out there is that any dimension in the model could be seen as the entry point. And I will give an example, which I didn't give in the multiplier event, but I do want to give an example of how we could use a different dimension of the CENF framework as an entry point. For now, I'm using content, knowledge, and skills, and I'm focusing on maybe a series of lessons that could look at fractions, decimals, and percentages. So what contexts use fractions, decimals, and percentages? Again, if we had time, and we might have time in the discussion later on, we could think of other ones as opposed to the ones that I'm going to present. But I have just a couple. In finances, you need percentages, a good understanding of percentages to calculate tax rates, to calculate bills, to calculate change, sale prices, working out a discount, calculating bonuses. And again, I've tried to pick examples from each of the different categories. Calculating bills, going to a restaurant, that's when people need it on a day-to-day basis. Calculating change, possibly in a particular work setting. Calculating bonuses, that's more specific maybe to someone that's working off, the word eludes me now, commission. Sorry, that's what I'm looking for. So how do you work out what commission based on selling house? I don't know if any of you have seen Selling Sunset, but the commission can be up in the millions. It's again always a percentage of the selling price. Likewise in citizenship, a percentage increase in average temperature. So climate change is to the forefront of everyone's mind at the moment. Proportion of the world's population living in poverty. So again, there's ethical issues to consider here. We see farmers protesting at how, despite rising costs, that they are not getting a fair price. So looking at or investigating what cost of a price of a pint of milk actually gets to the farmer. Another area in relation to that that's topical of late, and it's always looking for those topical issues, might be in relation to what percentage of the price of a gallon of petrol or a litre of petrol is actually going to the oil supplier. What percentage is going back to revenue? So they're giving us these initiatives or benefits the gas or the electricity money back that we're getting, but yet they're still making a lot more money into revenue based on the amount of tax we're paying. So is it just taking from one to pay another? Who knows? But again, a good understanding of proportion and percentages would help there. And likewise, recreation. So this is in your day-to-day leisurely lifestyle, splitting a bill for a meal, calculating a tip, purchasing cinema tickets for a group of people, determining the proportion of shots on target in a given match, baking, DIY measurements, and so on. So again, this is kind of a whistle-stop tour of the CENF. I should have said that at the start. What higher order skills are required? Analysing situations. And I think one really important one, and again, I think over Christmas, they seem to be more prevalent than ever before, these money lending advertisements. And you see that small print at the end, that interest is 300%. Can people analyse that and realise that that is not value for money, or that they're going to end up in more financial difficulty if they opt to go for that loan that's being advertised on TV or so on, as opposed to a credit union loan? Estimating if an object was fit in a small space. So what fraction, if you're trying to scale down an object or scale up an object, what do we need to multiply by? And it's generally fractions when we're talking about measurements like that. And again, analysing climate change. So is it really that temperatures have increased over a 5-year period? What is that percentage increase? What was the percentage increase in the previous 5 years? That would all require understanding percentages, fractions, decimals, and help us to analyse situations. And then reasoning. Is climate change real? What institute should I borrow from? Is the homelessness crisis worsening? And did Man United really deserve to win? The answer to that's always no. So dispositions then, self-confidence, developing their confidence paying for bills, being able to split a bill, knowing that a bill won't yield any nasty surprises. So for example, if VAT is 9% on one product, but it might be 23% on another, being able to know what difference that will lead to. And confidence when engaging in situations. So even that idea of looking at match statistics, maybe sitting over a cup of tea the next day on a lunch break, that you know what you're talking about when you refer to, yes, Man United did deserve to win, or no, they didn't. And again, some motivation there for why they would want to develop their numeracy skills. Okay, I still have 5 minutes. And then I just took some of those examples and highlighted where they might go in the second dimension, I should say, of the CENF framework, which is where we need to use these skills. So again, basic life skills, maybe baking, calculating change, in certain work or societal contexts, calculating taxes. Again, if we have a job, we generally need to be able to calculate taxes, or maybe it's purchasing multiple tickets for a cinema and so on. Some of them might be reduced prices, some of them might be half price for children and so on. As I said, specific work environments might be calculating bonuses or commission. And again, calculating proportion of people living in poverty, might be people working in a certain environment, working alongside certain charities and so on, but a bit more specific than what we've seen to date. So just to give one other example of another entry point. So maybe entering from higher order skills, and looking at this, I focused in particular on critical thinking. So where this idea stemmed from was actually probably around 12 o'clock, I think Saturday or Sunday evening, when I was watching a program called Dope Sick. And I'm not too sure if many of you here have seen it, but it's about the opioid epidemic in America, and in particular in relation to a drug called OxyContin. There was actually a girl, and that's what got me into the program, on the Late Late, speaking about how she got addicted to OxyContin, a Kildare GA footballer, whilst living in America. And what was really interesting, I think it was episode 5, if anyone has seen it or wants to look at it. This was the chart that the pharmaceutical company, Purdue Pharma, gave around to highlight that this opioid, OxyContin, was completely different to other opioids because it didn't actually have the highs and lows, or the peaks and troughs, as they're called, associated with opioids. So nobody got high, then came down into a real low and felt that they needed the drug again to get high and so on. And that's the way opioids generally worked prior to this. And this was the reason so many well-intentioned doctors prescribed this drug. But if we look at the graph, and this might be how we introduce it, there's something, as this analyst said, this chart is absolutely deceptive. And what we might put to students, well, what is it about the chart that is deceptive? Maybe just take a second and see, can you spot anything deceptive about it? If anyone spots it, I'm conscious time we have 3 minutes, just pop something into the chat maybe. If you spot anything deceptive about that chart, what could that analyst be referring to? And you can see there the Purdue's line was fewer peaks and valleys. Just take a minute just to let people have a look at it, because I think this could be a really nice starter in terms of functions graphs for developing numeracy skills. I'm just going to pop back to the chat, sorry, just to see. Yes, so someone has mentioned the scale on the left. So there's a couple of things to be aware of. It's a log scale, first of all. Now, we don't have to point that out if we're just starting off on graphs. But even without the log scale, so we start at 10, there's a fairly significant gap to 20, the gap starts decreasing. We go up to 30, 40. If we actually had a consistent scale on the left-hand side, this is what it would look like. You can see two different, if they have 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams of OxyContin. This drug actually went up to a tablet that had 160 milligrams. Now the peaks and valleys, as they call it, are quite obvious. So this is the graph that really should have been presented, whereas it was this graph that was presented to doctors to really try to convince them that there was no peaks and valleys with OxyContin. So again, how does this relate to other dimensions of the CENF framework? Graphing data, the relationship between variables, and an understanding of function. It's critical to health and care, which will be the focus of another Numeracy-Meet later in the series. Drug dosages, the effects of medication, and how safe is medication? Because the FDA in America had approved this. Again, there was reasons for that. It was an inside job as well. But again, we can explore why they would have approved it, because they would have data scientists on their panel. Again, citizenship, appropriate medical care, issues around addiction, and medical ethics, which clearly Purdue Pharma did not adhere to. And then self-confidence. Are they confident enough to realize, well, maybe a mistake was made here? Initially, they might say it was fine, that's what the data is showing, but are they open to correction? Confident in identifying mistruths. Confidence when engaging again in conversations, arguing the point, well, this scale is incorrect, and flexibility or openness to change. And again, why do we want to study numeracy? Well, examples like this show us it gives us a better understanding of real-world issues. We can make informed decisions about medical treatments, and that's really to the fore at the moment when we see so much debate around vaccines. And I'm not sure if any of you heard the interview with Novak Djokovic last night talking about why he's not taking the vaccine. And again, some skewed information are given there by all accounts. And be aware and identify unethical behaviour. So I think I'm just bang on. Well, no, I'm a minute over, but Mark will forgive me for that. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and Mark, I'll hand back to you. Thank you very much again for your time, folks.